Peace and love, family. Welcome back to the Midwest Black. I'm your host, DJ Joker, and this is, right now, a very special day. You know why? Because we're going to do Historical Origins Part 7. If you're new here, family, basically, I put world history on a timeline and give you the facts from a different perspective. I debunk a lot of theories and things what you think are true that just probably aren't true. You know, we go through religion, we go through ancient civilizations, we go through pretty much everything there is to talk about on this channel. So if you're new, make sure you go watch episode 1 and then catch up to episode 7. So we're moving fast with it, and I'm very grateful for all the responses and the people that keep tuning in and asking questions and staying dedicated to this knowledge. It's been a while since I dropped a video. I recently got married. Everything is going great with that. So wish me and my wife a great 2023, and may we be strong and oh so excellent with this history. Now, family, I'm not going to hold you any longer. Let's get into the facts. This is Historical Origins Part 7. All right, family, we're going to get right into it. Again, if you have not seen Historical Origins Part 6, make sure you go watch that before moving into Part 7. So in Part 6, we left off with basically Queen Isabella creating the Treaty of Versailles, which pretty much carved up the world. So it gave France and England, Spain, the Americas, Britain, and still some of England and other countries. They had pretty much Africa. So they carved up the world. Just a law. Treaty of Versailles, go look into it. We talked about that in part 6 and what was going on. And you also had the Moorish culture, the Moors being civilized Europe at this time. So we're like in the 1400s now, almost 1500s, and, you know, Europe is going through this renaissance, if you will. But that was ushered in by the Moors. You know, they brought in the culture up there. They brought in all of the things that you see related to medieval Europe, the sword making, the iron making, the steel making, all of that, spices and medicine, etc. So once Isabella pretty much used all of these people for the resources, they got the maps to the Americas that were pretty much being, you know, made by the Moors at that time. Now the war was on. So we're going to get into Leonardo da Vinci because his name always pops out in the Renaissance of what he was doing, his artwork and painting and etc., the Vitruvian Man and all these other things. You know, Leonardo da Vinci obviously was one of their chosen elite masters. Every culture has one, every society, you know, has these types of group of people related to, if you will, this whole Illuminati thing, which is starting place right here and pretty much is the information, secret information, coding information. A lot of this coming from the Moors, a lot of this coming from ancient Kemet. They still heavily study these people, their artwork and hiding things. You see right here on the Mona Lisa, she's depicted with the golden ratio around her face, or the golden mean, you know, the proportion of all things, or things growing in a spiral. We talked about this in past presentations, so make sure, I think that was in 5 or 6, if you will. But Leonardo da Vinci also gave you the Last Supper. And as you see right here between Jesus and on the, well, it's on the left of me, but probably you guys is right. You see the figure that's supposed to be Peter, Paul, whoever it is. But it's clearly depicted as a woman. It is feminine. And the V between them is representing the secret bloodline. Those of you who have seen the Da Vinci Code, this is what they're going through, and they get mad as if it was a crime for Jesus to have a spouse. But even Da Vinci depicted it in secret in his painting because they knew, you know, we all come from a woman. But due to patriarchy and all of these other things, the European is never glorified as woman. So in a lot of the artwork, they would shun her as well. So if you want to get into the whole backstory of Jesus and all of that kind of stuff, again, refer to previous episodes. But we're going to keep going here because this gets very, very deep. So next, we talk about Michelangelo as well. This is another guy that is often, you know, credited for being so great. But a lot of them, what they were doing were copying work that was left before them, the Grecian and Roman culture, almost trying to reinstill that with the materials that they had, you know, gained from the Moors. Once they basically kicked them out of Spain, all of that, they took all of that knowledge. They even marble sculpting in these things. But they referred to what was going on in the earlier time in their mythologies. You know, it's hidden in a lot of stuff. So these figures, while they were, you know, artists, if you will, they were also, you know, stealers of information and coding it in different messages that only the elite, if you will, can decipher. Now here, I wanted to point out a guy who isn't really talked about during the Renaissance. This is Albert Durr, and he's also a famous painter. And the reason why I put this in there, because of the backstory of this painting. In the painting, the knight and his dog are being followed by a goat-headed devil in the shadow of death on a pale horse with an hourglass. So family, we've already talked about Chronos and time, representing death, chronology. So here they reach back. I just told you they studied a lot of these Greek artists, and they wanted to keep that in power, as we're moving into the whole Italy. And, Italy is thriving now. But these stories were also depicted in the artwork. So the knight, the death, and the devil. And at the end of this story, basically the knight and his dog, they have to make it through the valley and pretty much get to the kingdom of heaven. What does it sound like? Psalms 23. So some people will say, no, that's ludicrous. But if you look at other versions of Psalm 23 before the 1600s, or really before the 1500s, it doesn't say, what it says now. So a lot of Bible verses are going to be inspired by just artists, just people, and we're going to drive that point home even more. And that gets right here, Caesar Borgia. And or Borgia, I don't really know how to say his name, but a lot of people have already discovered that this was the first, if you will, or second, third, there were several models of who Jesus would become. Caesar Borgia, he was a politician, he was a military soldier, and basically kind of a war veteran. So a lot of the stories of what people were seeing actually played out. They took these people and they put them into these other stories that would be later come, the Bible, the way, the this, that, and the third. But there's always an origin. So if you see here, we got all of the depictors, even going back to the 700s when they were calling him the Christos or the Christ. We talked about Yeshua Ak Mashiach, and for those of you that don't know what that is, again, go to the previous videos and you will see clearly the origins, the Serapis. We talked about Serapis, the Ptolemy Jesus, getting up to this point. And now you have Caesar Borgia. That is basically going to be your new Renaissance version. So this stuff is deep. I could spend a lot of time on it, but again, go look it up. So now Ponce de Leon is coming up. There's so many explorers, and Ponce de Leon is one of the most looked into guys just because he made a huge impact of being, in Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and all through the islands and coming over to Florida at that time. But just like anybody else, he was a murderer. The slave trade, if you will, is already kind of starting to have a foundation and getting ready to hype up. See, people in Northern Africa had already been getting enslaved ever since the fall of Kemet. So you've had a couple centuries by now of people becoming captured as workers because the whole empire basically is just dissembled. So people have fled. The leftover people in these territories were subject to being enslaved. So you had the Islamic Arabs coming in, and they're going to kind of mix in North area as they put on North Africa as they push more into these territories going west. So now they're coming up with these tribes, and the Spanish are just coming down in the tip and coming on over. They've already came in contact with the Moors. So these guys are coming to the Americas looking for gold. They're looking for supplies. And most importantly, they're looking for people. They were just doing brutal things. Now, this guy is not talked about enough. He should be talked about more than he is, but not in a good way. He was also a sick person. But Lucas de Elion, 1480 to 1526 he lived. But before 1526, what he and a lot of other these slave catchers were doing, on specifically mean slave catcher, is because they would come to the Americas, so along the coast in Florida and in the Carolinas, Virginia, and they would dock and kidnap Africans, kidnap the native population here. So we haven't started bringing Africans over yet, okay? This is before that. So they were already taking the natives here, kidnapping them, and then they would force the language upon them, the Spanish and Portuguese, so that they can use them for translators. That's how deep this was, family, and then kind of plot up their move, their sickening moves. So it was a strategic, purposely done move. So thing is, in 1523, Elion, he basically gets a patent from the king. Who we have? King Charles V is in power now. King Charles. So because the Spanish, the Portuguese, they pretty much own the Western world for the Treaty of Versailles still being in place. He pretty much gets a patent to explore, colonize. So he's going to come back in 1526 with African slaves on the ship and ones that they had already got from the lands or from the Caribbean to kind of push up into the Carolinas. So it's deep, family. And you hear a lot of myths about what these Spanish were looking for. They always talk about, oh, they were looking for the fountain of youth. We were just looking for gold. They try to make it seem like all of these conquistadors, if you will, were just explorers. But no, they were all in on the slave trade and trying to basically have the Americas a new extension of Europe, of Rome, of England, of Spain, of Portugal. All of these people had a hand in, coming over here. But that's what they wanted. So the fountain of youth and that they were just looking for gold, these are the myths to cover up the devious acts of the rape, the pillage, and murder of all of these criminals. But let's touch on the fountain of youth real quick. This is an old myth and an old tale that comes from the native Indians that were down there on the Bahamas Islands and in the Caribbean down there of, a miracle, basically spring water. Even now today, you got some of these fake preachers you see on the infomercials selling miracle spring water. So this has even reached to this day. But the fountain of youth was said to make you younger, make you live longer. And if you're an aging, old, stinky pirate whose enemy is also the sun, you're going to also want to figure out how to save yourself. And if I can go drink some water of people I'm colonizing, I'm going to do that. But that really wasn't it. And a lot of the pirates set out on journeys for that. There's a whole movie of Pirates of the Caribbean touching on the fountain of youth, which is really just a facade. And so they've capitalized off of it down here in St. Petersburg, Florida, because this was really the area where a lot of those Caribbean Africans and indigenous natives, they already knew about Florida and in the Gulf. They had been to the Americas for centuries. So it was always said that, hey, when you get to the Americas, this water is there coming in the Gulf. And then they knew about the Mississippi, and for those of you that are into this, a little bit more deeper, the fountain of youth, again, I would say is the woman. That's how you recreate yourself. That's how you live forever. So again, taking the focus off the woman and let's make it some mythological shit. So sorry for my language. Now, they also was known the cities of gold, the 7 cities of gold. Now, I believe personally that these did exist because you had the native populations going back to the Olmecs, and we made the connection between the ancient Kemetu or the ancient Kemites, how people different say it, the ancient Egyptians making contact with the Americas and giving the rise to that Olmec civilization. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with that, but say what you want. I will always say, go read They Came Before Columbus by Dr. Ivan Varsertima, and that will get the wheels turning. But nevertheless, the cities of gold here. Now, gold had also been able to be plentiful here in the Americas, just like it was in Africa, but nowhere near the rate that it still is occurring today. So a lot of that got used up, or the gold that was here. And I believe there was cities. There's so many myths about all of this stuff. And if you look, you see New Mexico, you see Kansas, you see South America, Chile, South America again in the Andes Mountains, South America and Peru. And they got one in Central Asia, could be. But gold, nevertheless, was all over the world. This was something else that they wanted to get their hands on, which would later inspire to the gold rush out west. So it was here, but that's what they was looking for, but also slavery. Now, Martin Luther. Let's get into Martin Luther because he's also in Europe at this time and a huge public figure. And Martin Luther published the Lutheran Bible, which is the German Bible translated from Hebrew and Greek. The New Testament was first published in 1522 and the complete Bible containing the Old and New Testament with the Apocrypha in 1534. Family, again. Word of God, Bible's supposed to be the word of God, all of this, but we keep finding publishers, we find authors, we find other people that is accredited for changing the language and all of these different things. One day y'all gonna stop believing this garbage and understanding that it's part of the story. It's part of the mystery. But when you deal with the mystery, you figure out all the answers to history. So Martin Luther, again, they needed a translation at that time because they knew what they were going to do. I say whenever you form a slave or a new type of people, whatever those people are, or a new village, new establishment, a language comes with it. So getting the language down was very important and very key. So the Bibles that they had was nothing really complete until 1534, but again, which one was it? Like I tell people, you got the Great Bible, the Latin Vulgate, the Geneva Bible, and the Bishop's Bible. If we got one all word, and all of these have publishers, authors, and the critical most thing is they all use a source of where they got their content from as the Greek Septuagint. Family, the Greek Septuagint, not Moses, not Jesus, not whoever, the Greek Septuagint, which came from the Ptolemies, okay? And I told you, they were the ones who ushered this in. So it's changed so many times all here. So you have Greek and Roman and Old French and Old English. And basically you have different versions of the Bible because everybody doesn't read the same context. Everybody doesn't read the same thing. And you're still even dealing with slaves and trying to teach them English, which we're going to touch on a little bit more. So 1524, Giovanni da Verza. Again, I'm probably saying a lot of these names wrong, family. Forgive me. I'm not Italian, but he's Italian. And they're going to come into the coast of the Carolinas again. We were doing this so early, and we talk about the 1619 project, but that's later, okay? So you already had them transporting some slaves and kidnapping slaves going back and forth. But pretty much, King, what is on here? He presented the findings to King Francis. So he comes, says, hey, King Francis, I found this or whatever. And they do the same thing. They go back, they get patents, and then they get permission to colonize. And the Queen and the Queen of England, they ain't got to do nothing. Never move a muscle, go to war, none of them. They all soft. But they send these little hitmen out to go and colonize the world. So it's really crazy. And the American people and Native people don't even know that this is going on because you got somebody else claiming your land, but you don't know it's claiming. The natives in California and out west, they didn't know that this was going on. So it's very cruel. And this is how a lot of this whole movement just snuck up. Okay. So anyway, you had him and other brothers and other family coming over here. And pretty much they get here and now they say they have rights to the new territory. And so they continue to fight up against the nations, not the nations, but the natives continuing to, go against them. But the natives were fighting back, a lot of Marcus de Niza. The reason why I put him up there because these guys reached down to the Mexico-Arizona border, coming from Spain and coming over into the Gulf and all over there. And even to this day, you got a school named after Marcus de Niza. Okay. And those people, some of those don't know how bad colonization was and what was going on, but again, another murder. We continue to glorify these people because that's all Spanish, Portuguese exploration culture is. They're nothing but murderers and criminals. So when that's all you have to glorify, so be it. But that tells a lot about your people. So now he got Queen Amina here. And the reason why I brought her up, and a lot of people know Queen Amina, participated in the slave trade. And a lot of these other, African nations that fell, participated in the slave trade. So you had the Muslims, the Arab Muslims, they're coming in and cleaning up, these Eastern countries, Egypt, Kenya, Somalia, Uganda, Tanzania. They're making their way all down in there into Kush. In other places, ancient Kush at that time, in Nigeria and the Congo, capturing the people and the slaves and pushing them there. But this is a kind of the Muslim Arab invasion mixed with Africans that are going to be bred into the slave, culture that is going on in Northern Africa. Again, when I talked about the Punic Wars that were going on, before all of this time, that's what they were doing in Ethiopia before you get the Coptic area and all this area. Those people, their descendants were put into slavery by the Greeks and the Romans. And then the Arabs get a mix in, and now you have Africans that are participating. But this is after a lot of these nations failed. So Queen Amina was one that also assisted. But you just got to understand the culture. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on that in a second. So now we've got Americans that have found the Carolinas, all that. They come up to an indigenous tribe called the Seatons. You know, there's all of these other native tribes that we're going to get into later, Chickasaw, Choctaw, all of that. But that's after the fact, you know, especially during the time of the Oregon Trail. We're going to talk about that in part 8, okay? And all of those 5 major native tribes they say we come from. But a lot of these tribes had different names. And the Europeans would rename them and beat them into submission to classify them as something else and all that kind of stuff, etc. So you have them there. You have Roanoke Colony starting to come up. Sir Walter Raleigh, you know, coming over for the English, making their stand. English, France, everybody's in America. It's going down, the new land. You know, Europe didn't have a lot of natural resources, which is another thing why they wanted to leave. They found out that the Moors and all these other people had been to the Americas getting things. And when the Europeans got there and found out all the resources in the Caribbean in these places, they had no choice but to come there. You know, again, because they only got so far into Africa, you know, in their natural resources. Once they started to go more south of the Congo, it was kind of hard to infiltrate those areas. You know, some of the old kingdoms were still putting up a pretty good drastic fight. So before you get Jamestown in 1607, you have so many attempts of Europeans coming trying to colonize, but they are getting their butts whooped. Those natives are laying the smackdown on them. And if you ever go look into Roanoke Colony, they talk about the Europeans that went there and they just kind of disappeared or vanished. You know, and there was others that were sent out to find them and see what they can find. But they vanished because a lot of the natives there, you know, fought back and the resources were getting depleted. They were coming in, burning their villages, and the natives started to move south and they started to move out to the west and into the Midwest, you know, leaving these areas. And at that time, you just had more Europeans starting to come in until you finally get Jamestown, and now they got their settlement. So from 1526, when De Allo comes in, and by the way, in 1526, he gets killed pretty much. So that shows you the battle. He gets killed, and there's so many other attempts of these guys coming in before 1607. So now we got Jamestown popping. And I'm moving to Francis Bacon. We're going to focus a little bit more on England. So he was kind of scientist, another one of these guys who robbed a lot of the information that was going on that time from the Moors and part of this secret society, this new secret society, if you will. This is the founding of your Illuminati. These guys that come out of the Renaissance that are going to start putting symbols into the towns and statues and kind of focusing more on the secret coding and rebuilding of England and everything like that. So Francis Bacon was a crucial part to William Shakespeare's work and working with him and helping him getting stuff published. So this guy was a pretty well-known figure. And also Francis Bacon, he assisted King James of England. See, a lot of these guys had a bunch of dirty secrets, you know, their founding fathers, if you will, King Henry, King James, all the St. Francis, St. Charles, like these are their founding fathers in England and Britain of this Middle Kingdom and what was going on. So they all are in the same ring of dirty secrets and information, and as well participating in openly knowing about the slave trade. Okay, so this is when we talk about Queen Elizabeth passing. They still owe to, all right, for what she inherited. So anyway, 1604, the Hampton Conference. It produced a new translation and a compilation of the approved books of the Bible. Not God, not nobody's hand. We keep going back and seeing man involved into it. When are you guys going to get it, family? You've been duped. Okay, now I know who are very near and dear to the Bible. That's cool. I feel you. But there's more to it. You got to open your mind and learn that is just not it. So again, having another conference of what they are going to use so they can carefully, strategically continue the slave trade. As we know, the Bible in the English language was a big part of our indoctrination and being enslaved. Those are the two crucial things. You know, if I took a baby and he didn't know nothing. He has no connection to the culture. I could teach him whatever language I want to. And the problem was you had a lot of broken English, Middle English, Old French, Old Norse from the Vikings pretty much come into all these phases of English, okay? So we're going to touch on this again. But this is how they did it, by capturing you and indoctrinating you with a poetry of a book. So hold that thought. Now, on this page, SMA Stewart, Robert Carr, and George Villers. Who are they, family? These are all of your King James lovers, okay? Like I said, bisexual. Some people say he was a black man, he was this, he wasn't that. But look, guys, we got books, we got the facts, we got the knowledge on what he was doing and what he was up to. Okay, here it is. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books on his relationships with all of these Dukes of Earl and their favorite. When they use the word favorite, that just means sexual partner. Okay, so go look into all of this stuff, look into some of these book titles, but they completely blow it wide open and pretty much tell you his life and what he was doing. His secret chambers. He had secret chambers going to bedrooms in his castles to where a lot of these undercover down low guys who were in powers of certain positions could sneak into. So I don't know why y'all want to follow this guy's word. I just won't get it. But I'll take this to the bank, family. So now here, we'll jump back into Africa real bit because we're going back and forth on what was going on in the continent and there. Queen Nzinga, I'm going to highlight her. She was actually betrayed by one of her noblemen, who turned her in over to the British or the Portuguese or whatever. And you had a lot of these turncoats doing that from the time of Kemet, to the time of the Middle Kingdom, to the time of slavery, to the time of now. You had people you could not trust, okay, that would basically sell you out. And that's pretty much what happened. And family, we just had that movie, The Woman King, and all of that, all of these different gender roles, man. See, the dominant society is very, very funny in what they do. But back then, we didn't have a woman king. We didn't say that. You could say queen, but not king, the ruler at that time. But a lot of these women had to stand up once the male population was depleted from fighting the Portuguese and the British. They had no choice. So a lot of women became warriors. The Dahomey, that's all that was. Now, she wasn't part of the Dahomey, but that's just an example of what was going on in North Africa because they were targeting the strong male class. Once you get rid of the warrior class, the women are vulnerable and the children are vulnerable. So that's what they were doing, family. So don't let them fool you with all of this mess that we just were voluntarily selling everybody into slavery. Either a lot of the Africans that got kidnapped and forced into slavery, when they created children, these children were groomed to be slave traders. You got to understand there's a grooming process. We just didn't wake up and decide to give up our own family. So quit acting retarded. Now, like I was saying, there's turncoats and things like that. Matthew da Costa, 1589 when he was born. They don't know what month, but black and Portuguese guy who was specifically used as an interpreter. I told you that they were doing that, so this guy is credited real big in Canada because he brought the Portuguese and all of them north to the Canada routes. I believe he also had a Moorish background in that map-making background. They used a lot of those people, who culturally knew their roots and their ancestry, and they passed down those type of information. They come from a bunch of black people who knew the maps and all of that. We talked about that, of the people who rode on the boats with Christopher Columbus. That's why he got here, because they were parts of the families of the map makers. And I think it was the same for Da Costa, but I could be wrong. But he led them into Canada, which is later going to give a rise to that whole French Indian War. We're going to talk about that, 100, 200 years later, but just is the first part of getting the people into the land. So a bunch of sellouts, bunch of turncoats. Go look this guy up. They got statues of everything like that, but he was selling us out. He knew the language and he was your translator, but translator for brute force. He also, this guy also worked down in Jamaica. I forgot about that. I got that there. Various leaders in the ports of Jamaica, at the slave ports. So sell out, man. On and on. Now, 1611, we finally get the completed version of the Bible. 1604, they started working on it. 1611, it's done. So here you go, the KJV, and this is what you got. And a lot of people that when they talk about slavery and the prophecy, the Bible has prophecy, Slavery was already in full swing at this time. I just proved that. So it's easy in 1604 when you are figuring out what goes into there, and we look at Deuteronomy, specifically the 28th verse, the chapter I forget, but the one that talks about the prophecy of slavery. It's easy for them to write that in there if it was already going on at that time, family. Like, some of y'all just got to use common sense. So this is the tool they use. So if it's in the holy book, and this is the book of the way, and I'm teaching people broken English and all of that, a lot of the masters at this time and early, they couldn't even speak English, correctly, because it's going through like its third change at this point. So it's very critical to understand that and how they indoctrinated you. So Shakespeare, the reason why I want to bring him back up is because no matter how you want to cut it, this was the top writer at that time. And if I'm going to produce a work that is going to be published on a wide scale, again, a work that is published, you can't publish God's work, what writer am I going to get? You have books, you have people who have broke this open. This Shakespeare pretty much was the writer of the Bible, which is why he uses yea and not and thee. Sounds like all of these ridiculous poems and these, poetry, okay, at that time. But this is why. English was broken, but he was one of the best speakers and writers, so you're going to assist, use that. Please assist us with this doctrine. So they got so many books out here. You can see a couple that talk about this and how you can secretly find Shakespeare's name in the Bible, but it's only in the King James Version, so it's a lot of stuff about that, guys. So you're reading a poem again, you're reading a fiction. So now we get to 1619. And what everybody wants to focus on is when it started here, but it started before there. And truthfully, let me say, the African population that was here, the indigenous natives, black natives that were already here in the 1520s, they were fighting back. I told you about Roanoke, so had slavery would have ended there, or the white people would have just pushed off and said, hey, don't go over there, they're killing us. That would have been your first successful slave revolt, so it was in a small part because they bought themselves some time, the natives there. But again, the Europeans just kept coming, and they were going to come hard because everybody had a hand in it. You had countries playing a hand in it because they understood and knew, hey, free labor is the way to go. So wrong. So look here, family, this is just sickening. At the top, this is a British slave ship in the 1780s, but this was the concept of how we could stack slaves on here, man. All of these bodies, hundreds of people on there, sleeping on top of each other. The conditions were horrible. This is what people were going on, and 1619, the White Lion, of course, it's got to be the White Lion, comes over. Couldn't be the Black Lion. Comes over to the Virginias, and this is where they're going to start populating Jamestown and all of these areas. It's crazy because looking at my own roots and all that, last name Carter, there is a Carter plantation down in Louisiana. My people come from that plantation, but it was started up in the Virginias and the Carolinas. And, my grandfather's great-great-grandfather also comes from that area. So it's crazy. So I'm part of this lineage too. So reparations for all, man. Y'all got to stop playing with us. Cut the check. So now, 1635, man, England, Spain, and France and odds of North America, which leads to the Franco-Spanish War. Now, they like to put these wars on little timelines of when they kicked off, but it was always war, family. These people never stopped fighting over the territory and resources. People were starving. They didn't know medicine. They were fighting even over women. We don't talk about that, and just the control and the women that they wanted, but these people were brute force, man, coming in, doing all of that. And this is your history of Europeans, and you can't glorify anything because of the wicked nature. So we talk about reparations, man. England, Spain, France, and when you get over here, the Conquistador, they all participated, the Muslims. So a lot of us say when we talk about collective reparations, all y'all need to pay truthfully because you had a hand in it, and they don't understand that because our enslavement was specific. And then after that, there was nothing else that did not target us more than Jim Crow, all these other things, but specifically target the people who specifically, helped pave the way. So y'all just got to understand that. But now we got wars popping off. Now I want to jump down into South America. King Zumbi was another brother who's popular down there but fought back. He was brought from the Congo and brought to Brazil. They were bringing a lot of Africans to Brazil. You know, cotton, sugarcane, tobacco. These were the big things before you even got to cotton. Cotton was a little bit later, but sugarcane, rice, and tobacco, coca leaf, all of this stuff was popular. So he freed himself 15 years old and then started helping other enslaved Africans get free and moving more north towards Mexico and all that kind of stuff. So you got a lot of stories of people fighting back. They just don't like to tell you that in history. They like to skip over a lot of this stuff. Queen Nanny of the Maroons. This is another figure. She was the leader of the Jamaican Maroons, they say. So we tell you Jamaican Maroons. The Maroons are dark-skinned African people, another group of African people. A lot of them were the first to populate South America in a country named Suriname. I talked about this, and came all through the Chain Islands. But you also had the American Maroon too down in Florida because they were all there. So Maroons was a term for the native black people that were within this area in the West. And so Queen Nanny was also said to be a Moor, okay, coming from Ghana. Okay, so a lot of them come from the West Coast and all of these places getting down to the Caribbean, and, you know, they assimilate in these other cultures, you know, so Moorish, African, indigenous mix of all these people, man. There's a lot of people fighting back, but look into her. We talk about Edward Hyde, Lord Canterbury real quick. This is another freak coming over from Europe, man, and he was a cross-dresser. And a lot of these guys were, which leads to their wigs and the little high heels, even George Washington and them. They were doing that stuff over here. This is that Grecian Europe culture. But they had a whole big thing about sodomy and how it was being done. It's crazy that I even have to talk about this, just because of the rape culture of that, the slaves, the people, the innocent, and all this stuff. In some of their cultures, they would punish people by doing that. So it got crazy and got out of hand to where they had to make laws specifically on that. This is how sick these people are. We've never in African history had to make a law on that. And even when it comes to human and trafficking and child trafficking now, you can go to a lot of these other cultures and find where you can go do something off with kids and all of this bullshit. You know, you don't find that in a lot of FBA culture and what we do. All of these other culture, and even in the Caribbean and sometimes on the continent, you find these sex criminals, if you will. So he was another one, but he was also, again, politician making rules in New York and the Virginias and Pennsylvanias and all that. But he was cross-dressing because he liked men. So he felt like, well, he can get through some of the certain rules if he dressed like a lady. And all kind of crazy stuff about these people. But this is who you had in power, controlling these slave plantations too, and the lawmakers. So it's absolutely ridiculous. This is what it came down to. What a mess. Now, family, we're in the 1600s, 1656 to 1667. You have the completion of St. Peter's Square. St. Peter's Square. We all know this new Holy Land, if you will, in Rome and all of that. And the reason I have to point this out is because, again, this is later, this is new. So this is going to be the new Holy Land and the first church, and the first church of your father Peter, you know, the basilica, all of that stuff. Basilica, man, it's so much that we could get on that. Basilica, basilisk, the snake, the evil snake. I'm gonna just stop there, but look into a lot of this stuff, man. So St. Peter's Square. Now, family, the thing we gonna point out here, this is gonna be like your, I'd say, if you will, the third holy mega church of the world. See, what the Europeans and the world was doing, they were basically having all of these one central location of where the Holy Land would be, even at a religious degree. So if you go back in time, the oldest Holy Land would be ancient Kemet. You know, one land that has all of the high knowledge that was specifically set in place by people to come there and study and worship. It's going to be ancient Kemet. Now, when Kemet falls, you're going to get the Serapeum, which the Greeks are going to bring in, and we're going to get a picture of the Serapeum in a minute. Second would be the Hagia Sophia in like Turkey or in the Middle East, and then you get St. Peter's Square. So the thing to point out is If you look at St. Peter's Square, it is exactly like the Temple of Man. What is the Temple of Man? That's in Luxor. That is the holy temple, the holiest of the holies where Hypostyle Hall is. Okay, the Temple of Amun, we also say. St. Peter's Square built just like it. And I talked about this in previous videos, but I want to bring it up again for some of you newer people. It's a copy. Now, why would the Greek, the Roman, Christian Jew copy ancient Kemet? Because they understood that was the way of secrets. But what the European does is clearly take out what the meaning of something was, and then he copies it because he knows that is the way, and then give you his version. So it's bust wide open right there. You see all of that. And when you get to like the St. Peter's Square, the middle, right there, that's the body of the people where they congregate. The body. And then they go to the temple, which leads to the head, okay, or the crown. So family, we busting game wide open. Now the Hagia Sophia, and then you notice how some of these buildings got the same structure, and even here you got the obelisk. It's an obelisk right in front of St. Peter's Square. Okay, so again, copying Kemet. Hagia Sophia, this was built, this was a new Christian cathedral after Constantinople, pretty much. Oh, okay, the Christian Cathedral of Constantinople. So they moved the capital from Greece to Constantinople, which is basically Turkey. So you have a new religious center, Hagia Sophia II. That was in, this century, this 6th century or whatever. Now, again, when I said Serapeum, this is the ruins of the Serapeum, because anything that the Greeks or the Romans built didn't last like it did in Kemet. So these are the scraps, but this was the hall dedicated to Serapis. Okay, and look at him, just like Jesus, okay, or Zeus at that time, before you get with Greek and Roman mythology. So this was the religious center, okay, that they ended up building there. And now at this time, pointing out, in the Americas, South Carolina is a full-blown slave port by 1670. Look at that. So at the same time the Holy Land getting built, you got them still getting slave money and funding the slave trade. Jewish boats and ships, money, all that kind of stuff. So shoot, the Roman Catholic Church might owe us too, now that I'm thinking about it. So you got all that going on. We got a full-blown slave port, man. This is a shame what they did to our brothers and sisters. Then you start getting more laws over here. So the French, the Romans, the Jew, all of that, Code Noir laws in 1685. Now you got to keep the slave population in control, and you just making laws left and right, doing this, doing that, man. Just torturing our people. Completely ridiculous. But then we got that ass in 1712 in the New York Slave Revolt, which was another uprising. Some African brothers in there, they were lynching and sexually assaulting our people, and, people, strategically put together an attack. And this was successful for a couple days, but then, of course, all of the white supremacists came and shut this down. But go look into the slave revolt. Just another example how we were fighting also here, in the Americas. We weren't just laying down. These people did not get off our back. So then you had the Stono Rebellion of 1739 in South Carolina. And after this rebellion, this resulted in the Negro Act of 1740. Where slaves could no longer communicate in groups. So this is when they start busting all up. This is where they get that, it's too many, it's a gang of black people are getting scared, because really what they didn't want you to do is to come up or strategize with how you were going to escape for freedom. So they had to put more laws, on slaves, because slaves were able to gather, before this. So they started shutting all that down once they tried to study us to see what we would do, so they could prevent an uprising, man. French and Indian War starts to pop off. Now this is in the North, and even in Canada. And they say Indian again, but the whole thing about Indian, remember, I think I even talked about that. Columbus coming over here trying to find a shortcut to India, and for slang calling the people who somewhat resembled Mongoloid Indians in the actual country of India. He said, well, we're going to call them Indians too, instead of calling them Native Black Americans. Because if I call them Indian too, there's a different, there's a separation from the people in which they really are. So this whole Indian term is just a confusion word, or they say the West Indies. That makes no sense. Calling Central, or the Caribbean, that the West Indies, like, so it's a confusion term instead of just saying, this is where the black natives were. So nevertheless, French and Indian War pop off. So you got a lot of turmoil going on. And it's basically just the French, pretty much coming in, and they're supporting, they're working with the British. All of these people are working together. Nobody's off the hook, and eliminating the indigenous populations. And now you got King George. We get to the George and see everybody had a hand. These punk kings who wouldn't pick up a rifle or do anything. They sat back and started doing a lot of stuff. So the Stamp Act, King George did, and basically that just allowed him to collect taxes from the 13 colonies. So they funded all of these ships. They did all of that. So now they got to collect taxes on that, basically. So he want part of his money back. And they collecting taxes on slaves. They're doing a lot of crap that's going on, and still financing Great Britain and all that. So there's a two-way deal, family. But the 13 colonies are now, they're starting to get fed up. They're getting fed up because we got our own thing popping. We taking all these slaves, by the millions now at this point. And hey, we're doing our own thing. We can keep this running. And why don't we need Great Britain anymore? Why don't we need England? So these old Englishmen and old Frenchmen, old Germans and old Romans and Grecians are what are going to be your founders of white Americans would be, which is why they always love to tell you their history and where they come from, because they know none of them are, just cut clean. They're all a mixture of Europeans that were here fighting for this land. And this is the result. You're going to get the American Revolutionary War, and slaves even participated in this war, too. And people were forced in. So now you got, the French and the British, and everybody's fighting for what's new America going to be. Now, the result of the 13 colonies pretty win, now this ended that treaty. They ended the Treaty of Versailles. So they don't really talk about that in history too much, but it ended that. So now they can kind of do their own thing. And they're kind of, went back there, kind of letting them do their own thing. So now you get it open, free, and now let's build America. Now what are we going to do? We're going to get African labor. We're going to get the smartest Africans and any remnants of the Moors. They just love those Moors. So we'll talk about Benjamin Banneker for a little bit, because he also, kidnapped from West Africa and brought here to the Americas in Maryland. But he's believed to also have that Moorish background because they were heavy on there. See, once the Moors kind of got kicked out of Spain, a lot of them fled back into Africa, into Ghana, into, the Ashanti tribes, and all into there. They kind of did that. And so Benjamin Banneker, extremely intelligent, created the almanac, basically world compass. He was into astrology. He was a scientist also. He was a mathematician. And over here on the side, you see this clock in England, what we call it Big Ben. I wonder why we call it Big Ben, because he was coming up with clocks. He came up with some of the first clocks over here in the Americas. And not only did they use them for that, he also aligned Washington, D.C. with the heavens. We talk about this a lot, and what does that mean? So this is the White House building in 1792 to 1800 is going to be the construction. So he was around at this time. And again, right after the war, you have to plant your new base or your new church. See, religion, they knew that it controlled a certain amount of people. So over here with the White House, the religion was going to be what we all swear in by. But we're just going to come out and it is a complete power, your government power. It's just like how the Vatican still makes government rules, but they're also the church. They're the head of state, but they're the church. So here in the White House, they're not the church. They're just the head of the country. So it's similar how they were kind of trying to do the order. But look at this. And what do you see? You see an owl here. You see an owl. We're going to get to what that owl represents. But this is facts, family. It's been exploited on various history shows and throughout our history. So if you don't know that there's what you will, a Masonic, origin to the founding of Washington, D.C., and we'll talk about the Masonic a little bit more. But here, you see a pyramid. Now, why would he want a pyramid here? just like the one that's on the dollar. Why would he want there? Because again, it goes back to ancient Kemet. When you study ancient Kemet and you read up on it, it blows everything out the water, and you can find out whatever you want to know, I promise. So you see the pyramid, but you see the pentagon star in there. We talked about that. They say the Star of David, all that. You say the pentagram, male, female, all of that, but it's really Baphomet is what they're representing. Okay, people will disagree with me on that, if you will, but that's what it is. It's Satan. The house of Satan is what they're representing right here. And again, it's clear as day is what they're doing. So White House over here on left or right, but you guys know your White House with your flag on it. And then on the other side is the buildings in Europe. Not St. Peter's Square. Dang it, now I'm forgetting it. But the Pantheon. You see that? The pose, the similar structure, obelisk, they copy everything because that's an extension of Europe and Rome. It's just like Europe and Rome's evil brother said, no, we're cutting you off because we got all this new land. That's all that happened. But they give homage to the founders and the people who helped them get here. And we see that even in the Builders family. They're doing the buildings the same. So come on. Now, we got here when I said Masonic and Masonry, when I talked about this is your whole age of this so-called Illuminati and Enlightenment period. But it's just the secrets of the world and the universe. So the European will say that there's 33 degrees of masonry and master masonry, but that's BS. It took you 40 years to study in the temple to become a master mason. So what they would do by the time you were 10, you could start training if you came from a lot of these families that, were continuing this work and this knowledge. 40 years. So 33, no, it's 360 degrees of world knowledge of everything, the whole circumference. And they say within 40 years, that's when you learn all of that. So this 33, they chop it down, and it's just kind of coded because there's 33 different societies. So there's a stairway of different societies until you get to top of the pyramid. So the food chain, who eats who, but they're all in cahoots with each other. And then we talked about the compass and the square. Basically, the square is, the square of the universe, the center of the universe, and the compass is everything that we're going to do in pretty much the business of what we're going to do around and within the universe. Stand on your square, they say sometime. And the G is geometry. Math is always something, so this is Knights Templar, all of that kind of stuff. They all fall under that same category. And a lot of them were doing nothing more but trying to be in the in crowd. Now, when we get to the dollar, we've blown this up before. Not here at least, but a lot of people are familiar with this history. You see the dollar over here, illuminated eye, great architect, but they're saying it's Lucifer. We say in our culture, the eye of Ra, the all-seeing eye, the protective eye. But again, they always want to make something demonic. So you have that, the 13 illuminated stars, 13 enlightened colonies, 13 letters in the motto, the El Pluribus Unum, one of many. Okay, so you have all of this going on, 13 layers of brick, 13 original colonies, 72 bricks, 72 powers of the name of God in the Kabbalah. So you have a lot of this secret history and knowledge all within the dollar. Why would they be doing it if this is America? Because again, these are the secret societies that have all been ushered into the building of America, and they clearly want to do that. Now, if you see here in this corner, you pull out any dollar bill right now, you will find this owl. This is this first screenshot where you see an owl there, and I showed you that owl in the foundation of Washington, D.C. Well, why do we use the owl? Okay, so the owl is Minerva, and we're going to get into that. But Minerva is the Roman goddess of kind of like Armaat in Kemetic theology. But you have Minerva. Now, this picture right here is supposed to be taken from a secret meeting of this secret society. So all your Masons, all your presidents, slave owners, all of the white supremacists you could think of would meet here. It's supposed to be out in California somewhere or on the West Coast. Could be wrong about location, but nevertheless, this is where they go to meet. And it's even rumored that people like Obama has been here. This is where they take you and where you swear in and do all kind of wicked shit. So this owl that they have, And Minerva, Roman goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. And what are they doing? America is always set up on strategic warfare. If it's not warfare for domination and all of the people in the world, then it's domination and warfare against people like us. And that's how it's always been. So it's founded on those principles. You know, she's also the sponsor of art, trade, and strategy, and represents defensive warfare. So again, war. So that's what it is. So they're having secret meetings to honor this, you know, warfare, because that's all it's about. That's all his history is war and brute force. He's a horrible, horrible human being. 1786, more laws, the Tegon laws. And this has to do with a lot of the slaves wearing head wraps and things like that in public. So a lot of us in the African continent, women have always worn head wraps and done these things. You know, it's always been part of a cultural thing. But when they got over here in the Americas, and the slaves didn't really have that. So they were basically forced to wear them here, but they knew about the African culture from everywhere they've been, and they forced them to wear them here in public and things like that, and how they would dress up, if you would. So it was a complete law. You had to cover your head. So they did that for African women especially. So it's crazy. Madame LaLaurie, a lot of you know about her, this sick European female here down in Louisiana. And this was just to give an example of some of the things that they were doing here with the slaves, but torturing them, experimenting on them. See, Europeans have always had this thing about experimenting on us and our organs and our genes and, you know, what they don't have and what they're missing, which is melanin. So they've always done these things and kind of had these myths about us and taking and receiving pain and we'd be okay. You know, so punishment and the nasty things that they were doing, eating body parts and cannibalism of slaves and, you know, stuff that they would even do with the feces of these slaves. These people were sick, and she was a well-known participator in that. And if she was one, you know that there was many. And it's crazy now because they actually kind of glorify, you know, getting ahead. They actually kind of glorify the history of this sick woman, you know, and this place where she kept these slaves and tortured these black slaves is now a museum, and people go see this sick stuff, man. So again, when you deal with the European and their history, it's always bad. It's always negative. And we're surprised of what we're seeing right now. This whole, I'm not even going to get on that, but we'll get on that later. So now you have the Louisiana Purchase that's kind of coming up, and pretty much what's going on, the French, as you see, they had this area of Louisiana. They had that in 1699. So once they moved in, this was the area they owned. And you see the British territory, the Spanish territory, and then the 13 colonies are now starting to spread out. But the French basically, they lose power and lose control. And when you look this up, they just don't like to flat out say the French were losing control of the area because of the Haitian Revolution, because they were getting their asses beat. They were completely low on military funds and resources to keep up the war of what was going on in then Santo Domingo. So the Haitian Revolution was critical to getting the French up out of America, because again, they also had slaves too. Now, they sometimes will say, well, we helped free you guys. No, the hell you wouldn't, because we didn't get freed initially until 1865, and some people were still slaves after the fact. So it just took the French, one colonizer, out of America. But you still had the British and Spanish there in this new U.S., if you will. So basically, Napoleon tried to take back over power in the 1800s, but he couldn't do it thanks to Dessalines and you know, soldiers like Boutmont. And we're going to talk about the Haitian Revolution on a different type of presentation I'm putting together for you guys, so I'm not going to touch it now. But nevertheless, the Louisiana Purchase happens from the 13 colonies. They buy this piece of land from the French now because they can't afford it anymore. Basically, they're losing in war. And pretty much that's where we're going to stop. So I know I went through a lot real quick and long video, but I don't want to get into any more. I want you guys to take your time with all this information, and hopefully I woke you guys up with a few gems here and there, and we're going to continue the lessons. So peace and Black Power, family. Definitely subscribe to this channel, continue to follow. You have any questions, post your questions, like this content, share it, you know, get this out. We are at war right now with our children, psychological warfare, orientation warfare, gender warfare. This stuff is sick. And I've had people tell me that there is no, agenda on our children and let them be and we can do all this. Family, the internet is full of trash and disgusting things every day of sex trafficking, children and these negative things. So be aware, be awake, and don't fall stupid. Educate your children. Bring them here to my channel. Get DVDs. There's a lot of different stuff out there you can do to stay on top of your knowledge and be square, family. So until next time, be on the lookout for more things from this channel. Peace.